Good morning. Welcome to our webcast today. My name is Andy Dio. I'm your host. And today, Jonathan Landeros, along with Jorge Fernandez, will be covering some Autodesk Vault tips and tricks for all of you. So before I kick it over to Jonathan, I do want to remind you that if you have any questions during the presentation, go ahead and type it in the Q&A section. Q&A area of your GoToWebinar control panel, and we'll address all of your questions in the Q&A session toward the end of the webcast. So with that, I'll pass the presentation over to Mr. Jonathan Landeros. Jonathan?
Good morning, everybody. I'm going to go ahead and, like Andy said, show you a few tips and tricks and things that you can use inside of Autodesk Vault. So as we go ahead and go through our introductions, that's myself, the handsome gentleman on the lower right. That is Jorge, and Jorge's made himself available as a panelist. And then just the agenda, things that we're going to talk about, customizing the user interface. Now that's not programming, but some tips on how you can make the interface work better for you. Also some things that you might not be aware of in searches, how you can use searches to your full advantage. Kind of dovetailed into that would be shortcuts as well. And then also a few administrative tasks, just some things to, I guess you could say, watch out for or make sure of, or make things more efficient. And we'll go through Q&A, and then finally just wrap everything up. So without any further ado, let's go ahead and get started. And I'm going to start out inside of the Vault Professional Interface. Now another, I guess you could say, preface, I am using Vault Professional, but everything I'm going to show, unless I say otherwise, is available to everybody. So Vault Basic, Vault Workgroup, Vault Professional, you'll all have access to this information or these abilities, unless I specifically tell you that this is something that is an elevated product. So the first thing, and one of the simplest things you can always do inside of Vault.
Hey, Jonathan, I apologize
Yes,
for interrupting. I just want to do a quick check. I've got a couple notes in that people can't hear you. So I want to just double check to make sure that everyone can hear the audio. If you cannot hear the audio, there's a hand raise button in your go to control panel. If you can click that for me, that would be fantastic, so I know who's able to hear audio. Okay, so it seems like a couple people are unable to hear audio. Does everyone else can hear fine?
I'm just trying to see if there's anyone.
All right, so it seems like it's coming back. People can hear.
Okay.
So it's good. All right. Sorry for the interruption, folks. Seems like the sound's back on now. So please continue.
Okay. Good old internet glitch. Let's see. Where were we? Okay. One of the first things I wanted to talk about was just adding and removing columns. What we're looking at here is kind of Vault's default out of the box state. And when you right-click on a column, you get different options for how you can affect the columns. Now, there's things like sorting, grouping, and alignments and things I'll start out with or give a mention to in a second. The first one I wanted to talk about is customizing the view. Right-click on the title bar, bring up Customize View. You've got fields that you can use, and you can add or remove columns you don't want. For example, if I'm interested in seeing my author as well as a description, which is a pretty common one that I see users want to bring in, you can adjust those. I'll remove that one actually. Put them in different spots and get the columns you want and remove the columns you don't want. So you can make that interface look the way you want it to look and get it to behave the way you want it to behave. Kind of another little, I guess I'll call it tip, is if you want to take a column, you can actually drag it and let go of it. And when you see that X appear, you can remove it. So you can always come through, set this guy up, exactly the way you want it, see what you need to see, and get rid of the things that you don't need. Another thing you can also do is this is something that can vary in different panels. So if you want to see some fields up here and maybe different fields in a different panel, you can always change that all the way across the board and get everything to look exactly the way you need to look. Now, I did say I would come back to this panel. I wanted to add some columns first, but other things you can also do is, well, remove columns from here, control alignment of a given column, maybe if you prefer a column centered or not centered, control the fit of a column. And another one that is, I guess you could say, somewhat passed over is grouping. I can say I want to group things by author, and I can rather gather my files by maybe an author name or a description and find something by a common field. So these are different things that you can always do to get that look and feel that you want. One of the other options you can use, again, one I think a lot of users just kind of gets lost in that shuffle, is the show a find panel. And when you have that find panel up, you can search for text within a window. So if I've maybe done a search or I've got a group and I know that some fields in here contain certain information, like I did a search for green, I can just search for that window for that particular item. So it's basically just a quick text search, so you can narrow your field even further after doing something like a search or some other kind of inquiry. And all of that is, again, available by right-clicking on your headers. Now, speaking to searches, a couple of things most of us, I would assume, and now I know that can sometimes be a bit of a dangerous thing, but is using searches within Vault and some of the nuances and that you've got. For example, if I have a folder selected and I'm using kind of the Vault Basic search right up here, you'll notice it's saying it's searching that particular folder. So that's a quick filter. If I search in that folder, I'm only searching in that folder. If I come up to a higher level and pick a different folder, for example, I picked my entire Vault, now I'm searching for every file in my entire Vault, and you can see I got a much larger group of items. So you can go through and see that I've got a lot of things in here that meet the criteria that I selected. And that's as simple as just selecting a folder. So if you want to kind of fine-tune even the most basic of searches, you can do that. And on the other hand, if you know that file's in there somewhere and the basic search isn't finding it, double check the folder. You might just have one selected and not realize it. Now that's our basic search, kind of the simplest general quick search that you might use. Excuse me. The next search you have is what we call the advanced search. Excuse me again. What the advanced search allows you to do is create more refined searches if you need to dig into something a little more detailed and maybe not cast as broad of a net and look for particular conditions. So for example, I'm going to go through and I'm going to look for files that were created by myself, created by me. So I'll tell Vault that I want to look for the created by property that contains my name. That's my username, John Landeros. And I can add that. But I can also add additional conditions. So I might go through and say, you know what, I also want to go through and look for a description because I have a very bad habit. I have a confession to make. I am absolutely terrible about filling in my iProperties in Inventor when I should. So for those of us who may not be familiar with Vault and as familiar, when you fill out iProperties in Inventor or the properties in AutoCAD, for example, Vault will take those and populate information, and that's how it creates its searchable fields. Now, part of my confession is I'm not very good at that. I still forget to this day. So I'm going to search for places where my description is empty. In other words, it has no value. I was guilty of being sloppy and not filling it out. And I also want to refine it a little bit more, and I'm going to add a file name, and I'm going to say that it does contain Cloud Lift. I'll add that in, I'll do a search, and I found all these files where the description is empty and contain the file name Cloud Lift and were created by me. So there's 20 different objects in there, so not too bad, but I guess you could say bad enough. Now, maybe I can't resolve these yet, but I know I want to return to them later. You can always save a search. Give it a name. There we go. And I can save it for later. And then over here, it will appear in this folder. And I can always just click and resolve that search without having to build all those conditions again. You know, it only takes a few minutes, but if you can avoid doing that few minutes several times, then it does start to add up over time. I've also got another search I already created in here called Checked Out by Me, which some of you have probably heard me joke if you've been in a Vault class with me. It's probably the #1 search of all time that everybody creates. It's a great way, but when you're leaving work at 5 o'clock or going out on a Friday or leaving for vacation, to make sure that you've got everything checked in and you don't have to worry about somebody not being able to use a file. I've also seen cases where admins will create, where the checkout field is not empty, so they can do a quick scan of the entire vault and see who's forgotten to check in files. But these are some saved searches that you can use and save to your advantage. Now, one other thing to kind of return to the empty description that I created. That description, and description. Must have removed it by mistake. There we go. Throw him up in there. So here we go. That description is empty. Now, we could always check out the files and grab open them all up and edit them one at a time, but that's not the way to do it. You can always also shift select, go to edit, and edit your properties. Make sure to take advantage of that, because this is how I sort of resolve my particular issues of, like I said, being a little sloppy at times. I can always add, remove more files, select additional properties if I need them, but I'm just going to focus on description. And I'm going to type in a description that I can use. So you can always type in whatever that information is, whatever you need. And if you need to make your life a little easier, you can come in and you can drag that down and basically do sort of an Excel style repetition and add all those names in, and then maybe add additional text if you need additional text. But do all these things to make life easier. When I choose OK, Vault's going to go ahead and open up edit those properties and add that to there. So you can go through without having to open up files, check out files, go through that whole process, quickly modify your properties and make those files searchable, make your life easier. That's why we've got these tools after all. Give that a moment. It'll just take a couple minutes to cycle through those files. It won't take too long. So we can see our progress bar projecting, or processing rather, and we'll go ahead and finish up in a moment. And we've gone ahead and updated all those properties, and I guess you could say I've done my penance for my own sin. So I could very quickly add as many properties as I need to, as many files as I need. Now the next thing I did want to talk about is something that another tool I think does get underused, and I sometimes think that the way Vault is often shown sort of thinks this is the only way that you can do this. We've been seeing that I've been going in, I've been searching for files, I've been grabbing files, interacting with folders, and while you can always right-click and open a file and take it into Inventor or AutoCAD, for example, there's a couple of other things you can do that are definitely worth noting. I can always right-click and create a shortcut. And what we'll see is down here, Vault starts adding shortcuts for a given set of files. Or files that I choose. We'll create one more shortcut. And at any point when I'm inside of Vault Explorer, I'm able to select any of those shortcuts, and these shortcuts can be to a folder, like I've got here. It can also be to any kind of file, a PDF, an Inventor drawing, an AutoCAD drawing, parts, so on. So quick shortcuts that you can get into here and access your files quickly. One thing that I think many users don't always realize, as I switch to Inventor, make sure I log into my Vault, is that these settings will actually transfer to Inventor as well, so you can access them from here. Oops. So when I tell Inventor I want to open a file from Vault, I'm on my Vault tab, I choose Open, I have a window for searching. Now, in different versions of Inventor, this may look a little different. There's a find button in older versions of Inventor, I think like 2012, for example. But you can type in a search there and filter a file just like you would in Vault without having to open Vault Explorer. You're searching Vault actually from right here. You can also recall any saved searches. This one I've cleaned out now, but I can go through and create searches and look for files, again, all without opening Vault Explorer. And finally, the shortcuts. I can use those shortcuts and shoot directly to a file without having to even touch Vault Explorer. One workflow, for example, is where I was doing some work and I needed to address 4 or 5 drawings over the course of a day. That was my task list. They were all over the folder structure in Vault. I got in the morning, got my my email, found those files, added the shortcuts, and I basically very rarely needed to go into a Vault again after that. I had my list. I just accessed it from here, and I'm opening files and off and running. So that's where we were able to go in and really make use of this. And I know this one, I think maybe it's a bit of a personal thing in my case, but I think this one doesn't see as much. It isn't taken advantage of as much as it could be. So finally, a little bit of a segue, something for a bit of the admins, and a couple of things I always, I guess you could say, harp on a little bit. I'm going to switch over to the ADMS console, and this is basically, imagine we're looking at the server now. My laptop's playing the role of both server and client, but imagine this is the server we're looking at. And one of the most basic things to any admin should check from time to time is number of days since the last server backup. Now this is a newly restored backup for this morning. I wanted to make sure I had a clean vault, so it's never been backed up. But it kind of goes without saying you don't want to open that up and see 346 days for your last backup if that's your engineering data. So it does pay for occasionally just to take a glance at this and make sure everything's running as it should. Sometimes passwords change, sometimes scheduled tasks stop, and it is again worth one of those things that's just worth an occasional check. I also do know, and it varies from system to system, that there's utilities that will send you an email for a successful backup or a failed backup. It just depends on kind of how that individual system is, but that is something that can be done. And this backup can be, as I move a couple windows around, whoops, didn't want to move that window around. I'll grab it from here actually. And my typing is just dreadful at the moment. There we go. Can be scripted, and this is just a quick example I drew of a scripted backup that can run as a scheduled task. So that's one of the most direct ways that an admin can always make sure his backups are running, or hers, as the case might be. A couple of other things. The occasional maintenance of a backup can be things like this. Vault does recommend that database be defragged. It's been around a little while. It was created back in 2012. It's probably been a while since I defragmented it, and you can always go through and just clean up the database, make sure it's running as efficiently and as quickly as it can be. Also something you can script. Some other things that, things like purging old files. Vault does create versions of files every time you check in. It will create a version of the files. And so it's possible to get, infinite versions. You actually look down here where I just moved the cursor. I've got 10 versions somewhere in my vault. And it may be that, I realize, I've got a bunch of versions. I only need a couple. You can run a purging operation, purge out the files, and get rid of old versions, and basically just manage the size of your vault. And by the way, that can also be scripted to happen every 6 months or so. Probably one of the last tips I wanted to offer for kind of the administrative groups, something I guess that I sometimes run into especially as maybe a smaller Vault ecosystem, shall I call it, where maybe there's only 1 or 2 users encounter, but then as they grow, things get more challenging to manage. When you get into the administration of your users, there's actually 2 ways to assign permissions to users. One is every user can have their own permissions set, and you can set that per user. When you've got 2 or 3 users, that can be a pretty simple task. But when you get 20 or 30 users, it can get to be unwieldy if you have to make sure that 15 users have the same permissions. So one other thing that is definitely worth consideration, I think, for a lot of admins, is to use groups. A group can be created, and that group can carry the permissions as far as access to vaults, what roles it has, and then you can add a user to that group. So here I've just borrowed the guest user that's inside a Vault, but a configuration can be created where the user themselves has no permissions in and of themselves. So if I look at my guest, they don't have any permissions. What they are a member of is they're a member of the group, and the group grants them the permissions. So that's another thing, again, to kind of consider. There's, I guess you could say, no real right or wrong way to approach it, but some of the things that you can see that you can take advantage of as far as the administrative level of Vault. So there we go. We talked a little bit about customizing the user interface, searches and shortcuts, and then finally a few administrative tasks that you can also take advantage of if you're more on the IT side of things or the CAD management side. Some of these may have been a refresh. Some of these, I hope were new tips as well. So that's a little bit of what we covered. Now I'd like to go ahead and open it up for Q&A, and we'll just kind of see what questions we've got.
All right. So as we wait for questions to come in, I do want to remind the audience that when you log off this webcast, there's a short survey that pops up. I think there's 5 questions in there. Just take about a minute or so to fill it out, and please do that and help us out. So one question that just came in, and I'm going to read it out loud for the audience, but I think you can see it as well, Jonathan, is there a way to access a file's iProperties from Vault Client in the way I would from Windows Explorer?
Just kind of thinking about that one. I assume it's by right-clicking and pulling up iProperties, because you can do that in Windows Explorer. This is one of those, I guess you could say, this is one of those ones. Remember how I said I would mention if I went into Vault Pro functionality or Vault Workgroup functionality? This is what I'm going to do. If you have Vault Workgroup and Vault Workgroup or Vault Pro, you can bring up a View Properties grid, and that will give you something similar. I know it's not exactly the same, but kind of that sample functionality or that type of functionality. As far as bringing up exactly the way, that's probably the closest way to do it in Vault.
Okay. And as always, if you have questions about, if I have basic, how do I move to Workgroup? How do I move to Vault Pro? What functionalities are there? Make sure to contact your Katif account manager or contact Jonathan or Jorge or one of us, and we'll be more than happy to help you explore that. Another question that came in, Jonathan, is about when you talk about defragging your Vault, do the users have to be logged off for you to do that, or can you do that while the users are still using the Vault?
You don't want to do it when the users are inside of Vault, because basically they don't have to be logged off, but they're going to be in for quite a surprise. I actually just brought up the window right now so we could all see it. This is one of those windows that we always see, or maybe I'm just projecting onto everybody else. This is what I do. This is the one I always click yes on and think, what did I just agree to? But if we read it, it's going to lock the Vault and it won't be accessible to users. So while they don't have to be logged off, they won't be able to use Vault. So you definitely want to run it, at a time when you won't have users trying to kick down your door with pitchforks and torches. So weekends, evenings, and that kind of thing.
Great. And then a question that related back to one of the first tips that you shared, Jonathan, is that can you save your column configuration that you set up in Vault?
What I would call out of the box, there isn't a way to do it, but I know on the App Exchange, I just actually looked it up yesterday because I kind of had my own question for that. If my memory serves, it's called Thunderdome. So for those of us Macs, somebody apparently in that group is a Mad Max fan. And it's available for Vault Workgroup and Vault Pro, and that would let you export your settings, your searches, your column customizations, your shortcuts are the three things I remember, and there may be a couple of more. So there is an app on the Exchange, and for those of you who don't know what the App Exchange is, it's basically a site where different, everything from individuals to companies will write add-ins that will plug into Vault or Inventor or so on.
Great. And then just one thing that I do want to remind everyone online here is at Katif we do offer a service. It's the Premium Advantage Support. And with that support contract, if you have a Vault installation, we will go on site and work with you up to 4 times a year to, optimize your Vault, help you with configurations and things like that. We also have, consulting services available for those of you who just need one-off projects, and maybe there's certain things that you want to get done with your Vault installation or configuration. Make sure to reach out to us. We have a lot of experts on staff that can help you with those kind of things. With that, we're at the end of the hour. So that's all the time we have for today. Again, I want to thank everyone for logging on and being with us today. I know some of you had questions that we weren't able to answer, but rest assured we will follow up with you offline to answer those questions. With that, I'll refer to Jonathan or Jorge if you guys have any last-minute things you want to say to the audience before we log off here.
I think the only thing I've got to say is, thank you very much for taking the time to talk to us, and I hope everybody got something they can go back and use.
Great, appreciate it. Thanks everybody, and have a great rest of your day.